Welcome to Dark Speak, where secrets never sleep, and the darkness always has something to say. But a strange man's voice rang out from outside. "Hey, I need help." I stopped. The man said he needed to use the phone. His voice was even but somehow indescribable, urgent and cold. I asked who it was, but he just repeated that he needed to use the phone. I didn't dare open the window curtains, partly because of fear, partly because of a vague premonition that was tightening my chest. A very clear thought flashed through my mind. Opening this door would be a fatal mistake. I turned to go up the stairs when I heard a loud knocking on the door. "Outside!" The voice became urgent. "Wait, I need help." In that moment, I realized the knocking sounded very familiar, as if it sounded in bad dreams that I never remembered when I woke up. That meant he had seen me. His gaze was through the small glass at the top of the door, where you could see inside if you stood close enough. I turned, and though the darkness had swallowed the porch, his silhouette was still visible, silent but watchful. I couldn't see his eyes, but I knew he was staring at me, as if waiting for me to make a mistake. I turned and ran up the stairs, my heart pounding so hard I could hear in my ears. I went into my parents' room, the only room upstairs with a landline, and grabbed a receiver, dialing my mother's cell phone. I didn't remember my father's number at the time. My mother picked up, her voice sounding like it had been through a few drinks. But when I said there was a man at the door asking come in, her tone suddenly changed, becoming alert and urgent to the point where I could feel the anxiety rising. My mother asked in a rush, "Have I talked to him? Did he know I was alone?" I answered honestly that I did. And then my mother asked me who I thought he was. Only then did I remember the pizza delivery man. I told her that he had asked me that question as soon as he had delivered the pizza. As soon as I finished speaking, the doorbell rang. Once, twice, 3 times in a row. I clutched the receiver, whispering in a panic that he wouldn't leave. My mother told me to lock the door and stay inside. She said she would call the police immediately. She kept me on the phone while she used my father's phone to contact the police, and my parents left the restaurant where they were sitting so they could hear better. It was a hot summer night. The windows in the house were all open to let in the breeze. But it was from my parents' window that I heard the soft creaking of the side gate hinges, as if someone was gently opening it. I told my mother right away, but she just told me to be quiet, turn off all the lights, and not leave the room. I whispered, trembling, "What if he tries to get in through the study window?" Mom interrupted, her voice tense. "Don't say anything. The police are coming." She continued to give me the situation, saying that they were a few minutes away and reminding me not to make a sound. I was trying to regain my composure when another sound rang out. Footsteps. Slow, steady, and most importantly, they came from inside the ground floor. I whispered it to Mom in a panic. I heard her yelling to someone on the other end of the line, "He's in the house. Hurry." Mom told me to get under the bed and stay there until someone came. For me, at the age of 12, this was the most terrifying and surreal moment of my life. The only thing between me and the stranger was a tiny lock on my parents' bedroom door. Outside in the hallway, the footsteps echoed steadily, getting closer. The wooden stairs creaked, and then stopped right near the end of the hallway, where my room and my sister's room were next to each other. My parents' room was at the bottom of the stairs, and I was trying to hold my breath so as not to make the slightest noise. I knew he was right in front of the door. The footsteps in the hallway suddenly faded, as if he were leaving the room. I guessed the intruder had gone into another bedroom and was rummaging around. Mom whispered into the phone, telling me that the police would be there shortly and that I was absolutely not to move until they were inside the house. The slow sound of footsteps came again, this time heading straight for my parents' bedroom door, where I was hiding. The knob was turned a few times, but the lock remained tight. He tried again, as if hoping that by some miracle the door would open. Then a soft knock. No words, just a knock, and another turn of the knob. Finally, the footsteps left, echoing down the hallway, disappearing up the stairs. By then, I had to bite my lip to keep from crying. I didn't even dare whisper into the phone, too scared to make a sound. A moment later, Mom told me the police had arrived, but I had to stay put. I thought they were going to break down the door, but instead I heard heavy footsteps and a male voice calling my name, identifying itself as a police officer. My mother allowed me to answer. When I opened the door, there were 2 police officers upstairs and 2 others downstairs. They didn't break down the front door, which was still locked, but the back door was left open and the sliding window behind it was wide open, clearly the way he had come in the first place. I told them the whole story, not forgetting to mention my suspicions about the pizza delivery man. When my parents returned, only the 2 police officers remained. They took down my statement, along with my description of the delivery man. The next evening, my parents took me to Luna's hearth, asking me to identify myself if I saw him again. But I didn't see anyone like him. They asked the manager, and he said that the man matching description was named Marlowe, and he was making deliveries. When we told him the story, he brushed it off, saying it couldn't possibly be Marlowe, and told us to leave. My parents were furious, argued with the manager, and declared they would never shop there again. We sat in the car in the parking lot, waiting for almost an hour to see if Marlowe would return, but he was gone. My parents assumed the manager had called or texted him, causing him to stay away. But really no one knew. They had gone to lawyers, but no one took the case for lack of evidence. We never went back to Luna's hearth, and it was years before my parents dared to let me stay home alone again. I still believe it was Marlowe, or at least something to do with it, because who else knew I was home alone that night? Years later, when I was a teenager, my parents moved from Blackstone to a remote area in northern Idaho. They had just retired and built their dream house deep in the woods. No neighbors, just an endless sea of trees, surrounded by national parks and logging areas. The house was large, 2 stories, with a gym, bar, pool room, and even a mini movie theater in the basement. Everything was perfect, or so it seemed. I was dating my high school girlfriend at the time. And once again, I was about to experience the same creepy feeling as that night in Blackstone Town. It was a cold Saturday night when my parents, Mr. Huey and Mrs. Thoa, decided to go to Lamjong Old Town to have dinner and watch a concert. Trin Vi, was home alone, but actually I wasn't completely alone. I had invited Naklan, my new girlfriend, to watch a movie in the basement screening room. The house was located right on the edge of Kai Lu Forest, an area of dense vegetation that I had heard many unpleasant stories about since I was a child. However, during the day, this place was so peaceful that it was easy to forget that darkness was always lurking outside. Lon came, carrying a few cans of beer that she had secretly hidden from home. We were just kids who wanted to act like adults, thinking that no one would care. I turned on projector, chose the movie Chien Bin Dao Truong. The sound of war drums resounded in the clothes room. At first, everything was normal, until almost midnight. A strange feeling rushed straight into my heart, so strong that it made my whole body freeze. My heart was pounding, my breathing was rapid. I kept glancing out the large window behind the seat, where there was only darkness and dense forest shadows. Not wanting to scare Lon, I tried to be quiet, but the atmosphere between us was noticeably heavy. For the rest of the movie, the feeling of being watched by someone still clung to me like a cold chain. The movie ended. I saw Lon off the car. The road in front of the house was quiet, yellow lights casting a thin layer of fog. She started the car and left, and I went back into the house. As I reached the doorstep, I suddenly remembered that I had not turned off the lights in the bar, the billiard room, and projection room. I went back down to the basement, turning off the projection room light first, and then I stood still. Outside the large window, a figure was standing under flickering light. He looked like a vagrant, his hair disheveled, his clothes covered in mud. But what froze my blood was his face, a wide, twisted smile, eyes wide and glowing with madness. In his hand, a long knife glinting with steel. He tapped the tip of the knife against the glass, slowly, patiently, as if waiting for my reaction. I backed away, swallowed, and walked to the bar to turn off all the lights. But as soon as I turned the switch, my heart nearly jumped out of my chest. Through the sliding glass door facing the woods, I saw him slowly walking from the other window, still smiling, still staring at me. There was only a thin layer of glass between us. He didn't break the door, didn't move, just stood there, watching. I walked silently upstairs, just as my parents opened the door and walked in. A little shakily, I told them that I had just seen a man with a knife in the yard, standing right next to the glass. My mother paled immediately. My father said nothing, just quietly went to the safe, took the rifle, and rushed out. When he returned, the police had been called. My mother had just told me that there had been many strange break-ins around Kai Lu Forest recently. People suspected that someone was living in the forest, occasionally sneaking into houses to scare or try to break in. My description matched the horror. The police searched everywhere, but found nothing. No footprints, no signs of forced entry, just a dark shadow of the forest and the cold wind whistling through the leaves. I thought it was all over, but it wasn't. That night, lying in bed on the second floor, I heard a soft knocking coming from the floor. Right below me was the movie theater. The knocking sounded like metal hitting glass, steady and cold. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but the knocking continued for hours. Weeks later, it came back. Sometimes I would wake up at 3 a.m, and in the eerie silence, the sound would ring out like a call from somewhere dark. Another night, I even heard slow footsteps on the roof. When winter came, my parents had to go on a business trip for a few days. Worried about me, they left a pistol in the bedroom drawer in case they needed to defend themselves. There was also Ka Dan, a large and loyal Rottweiler, who was so gentle that he never barked unless there was something really out there. One winter night, when I was home alone in the remote town of Yanglan, the air outside was thick with cold. I suddenly heard slow, heavy footsteps, as if deliberately stepping deep into the thick layer of snow in the yard. My hunting dog, Boya, was curled up on the floor, when suddenly its ears perked up, its hair standing on end. It growled deeply and rushed to the main door, barking fiercely. The hoarse sound seemed to tear the night apart. Boya never reacted like that unless it detected something truly dangerous. I tried to hold my breath, not move, not make a sound. I didn't want the outsider to know that I was alone in the house. The footsteps stopped. Then each knock on the door rang out, slow, hoarse, and teasing. I remained silent. That night, I pulled the curtains, locked the door, placed the pistol beside the bed, and Boya lay at my feet. The next morning, when I opened the door, what I saw sent a chill down my spine. Fresh footprints in the snow, circling the house. Each window had a long pause, as if someone was trying to peek inside. I followed the tracks around the yard, and eventually they led straight into the woods behind the house. I had walked about half a mile when the footprints began to twist and turn, as if they were deliberately trying to mislead the observer. A strong feeling told me to stop, that going any further would be a fatal mistake. That night, the knock came again. This time, I knew it was him. I unlocked the door, grabbed my gun, and stepped out onto the second-floor balcony. Turning on the fog lights and shining them straight down into the backyard, I saw him standing there, the same man, his smile crooked, his eyes empty and emotionless. In his hand was the long knife, and his gaze was fixed on me as if he wanted to pierce my very soul. I raised my gun, roaring that if he didn't leave immediately, I would shoot. He didn't blink, just stood there, his smile growing wider and wider. I fired a warning shot into the air, and then he reacted. He staggered a few steps and slowly retreated into the darkness of the forest, still facing me. I immediately released Bakna. He darted like a black arrow into the forest, barking and growling. Even though the hunting collar wouldn't let him go far, I wanted to believe that he had chased him away forever, because after that night, I never saw him again. In March 2022, during spring break of my sophomore year of college, a group of 6 of my friends and I decided to rent an old cabin on the outskirts of Blackwater, South Carolina, to escape the hustle and bustle of life. We wanted a few days without social media, without schoolwork, just wine, music, and memories. The group consisted of 4 guys, me, Din Quan, Lam Kang, and Hao Due, and 2 girls, Van Ton and Nak Dao. The 2-story wooden house with a wraparound porch and 2 bathrooms was on private land next to a large lake. It was completely isolated with no town for miles, just dense forest. When we called the book, the owner, a man with a thick southern accent, said something that made us laugh. Don't go too deep into the forest. There's some old things there, abandoned wells, rotten fences, poisonous snakes, and getting lost here is no fun. We thought he was just adding a little spookiness to suit the southern atmosphere. But when we got there, our smiles faded. The trip took all day. The GPS died almost an hour before we reached our destination. The last stretch of road was just a narrow dirt road wide enough for one car, covered in dense forest trees overhead. When the cabin came into view, it looked nothing like promotional photos. Old, dirty, dusty windows, a few shutters hanging crookedly. A musty, rotten smell mixed with something like animal carcasses hung in the air. We tried to laugh it off, telling ourselves that this was just making the trip more special. But deep down, we all had a bad feeling. We unloaded our luggage in the car, checked in, and opened the wine. Around 7 o'clock in the evening, the bustling atmosphere of the first night filled the cabin. The barbecue outside emitted fragrant smoke, and music from a portable speaker echoed through the woods. We ate and played a few cards, laughing until late at night. Around 11 o'clock, a cold wind blew from somewhere, forcing the group back inside. When I closed the door, I suddenly realized that it was strangely dark outside, not the normal darkness of a forest night, but a deep, dense darkness that seemed to swallow all light. The porch light only shone a few steps before going out into the endless blackness. The tree trunks seemed to huddle together, surrounding us from all directions. There was no sound of insects, no sound of wind, only a heavy silence that made it hard to breathe. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, the group passed out from exhaustion. I lay in a small room on the ground floor, right next to the kitchen. The room had only a bed and a window facing the dark forest. At exactly 4:15, I woke up, not knowing why, but only knowing that my heart was pounding as if someone had just shaken it. I lay still, eyes fixed on the window frame, when a click, click, click sounded. At first, I thought it was a sound of wood cracking in the fireplace, but the steady rhythm and dry sound made me realize that it was not metal or machinery. It was like the slow tapping of fingernails on glass. I turned my head, and my heart stopped. Right outside the window was a man. He pressed his face against the thin glass, his skin pale as cold wax, his hair disheveled and his chest bare. His eyes were wide open, lifeless, unblinking, just staring inside. His lips were parted, his breath clouding the glass. His long fingers tapped slowly, as if teasing, as if waiting. My body stiffened. Then the tapping quickened. I softly called Min's name, who was sleeping on the sofa right outside the room. Seeing no response, I called louder. Min was startled and struggled to sit up when I pointed with a trembling hand. He looked out and immediately jumped up, knocking over the coffee table. The noise must have made the guy outside retreat, because when Min turned on the porch light and ran out, he had disappeared. The whole group was woken up in the middle of the night. Lon and Vi turned pale, and Dung tried to reassure them that it was just a drunk guy who had lost his way. Khan said it could be a hunter. But deep down I knew that look belonged to someone who had been following me all along. We blocked all the doors, pulled the sofa in front of the living room window, and took turns staying up until morning. When the first rays of sunlight shone down, we stepped outside and froze. Bare footprints were clearly visible on the wet ground, surrounding the entire cabin. They stopped at every window, including the tiny window in the bathroom upstairs. We should have left immediately, but subjectivity and stubbornness kept the group staying. The second night started the same as before, with drinks, music, and a campfire, but the atmosphere was completely different. Everyone kept their eyes on the dark forest. Vi gave up drinking, and Khan wore a hunting knife at his waist. When the group returned inside, we locked all the doors, checking every latch. Around 3:30, Min went to the kitchen to get water. He paused in the hallway, calling my name softly. When I approached, he pointed. There was someone in the kitchen. It was the man from the night before. But this time, he was right in the house. His body was bare, his back covered with long, rough scratches. He stood in front of the refrigerator, tilting his head as if he had never seen it before. His body swayed slowly, his feet moving lightly on the tile floor. Min backed away. We gathered silently in the hallway, each of us holding something that could be used as a weapon. I grabbed the pocket knife. Lon grabbed the poker. Khan broke off an old chair leg. When the lights came back on, the kitchen was empty. The back door was wide open, but there was no sign of forced entry. It simply opened. We left the cabin just 20 minutes later, leaving behind a night that no one in the group wanted to talk about. No one in the group argued or turned around to get more stuff. We grabbed the bare essentials, wallets, keys, phones, and raced through the tree-lined driveway, trying to find a spot with signal to call the Ravenshore County Sheriff. We met him at a small diner, tucked away on a deserted stretch of highway. The sheriff was a large, gray-haired man, wiping his hands on a kitchen towel as he listened quietly to our story. What sent a chill down my spine was the look on his face. No surprise, as if what we were recounting was a routine occurrence in this place. He asked a simple question. Was anyone hurt? When we shook our heads, he sighed and said slowly, "Well, there's a lot of people hiding out in the woods around here lately, not in their right mind." Matt, and I immediately protested, tried to explain that the guy wasn't just a vagrant. He followed us for 2 nights in a row, found a way to get inside the cabin without breaking the lock, and had that soul-striking look in his eyes. But the sheriff just nodded, as if he had heard what we said dozens of times before. When we mentioned the owner of the cabin in Ravenshore Hollow, something indescribable flashed in his eyes, a knowing yet evasive look. The listing disappeared a few days later, wiped from every website. No response, no phone call to explain, and of course, no refund of deposit. But the most haunting thing wasn't the money. It was that face, the pale skin, the wide, unmoving eyes, the way he pressed himself against the glass, just to look inside as if he knew me. Sometimes, in the middle of sleepless nights, I still see that image flashing in my mind. We didn't talk about that trip much anymore. And as far as I know, none of the group has ever returned to North Ravenshore since that night. The protagonist, at the age of 12, is left home alone by his parents at night. From a peaceful town, everything begins when a group of friends decide to rent a cabin in the woods in Ravenshore Hollow. Initially thinking it would be a fun vacation, they discover a mysterious man constantly appearing outside and being able to enter the cabin without breaking the lock. The situation escalates when he follows them for 2 nights in a row. Panicked, the group flees in the middle of the night, going to the sheriff to report it. Strangely, he is not surprised, as if he knew about this all along. The cabin rental ad disappears shortly after, no one contacted him, and the deposit is not returned. Even though many years have passed, the image of the pale face pressed against the glass door still haunts the protagonist every time he wakes up in the middle of the night. The group never returns to Ravenshore again, but sometimes, when passing through the empty streets, the protagonist still feels a familiar gaze watching from the darkness and knows that the story is not really over. The story ends here. See you in the next video. Goodbye.